Welcome to Indie Film Podcast. I'm Victoria.
And I am Chuck. The month of November, we are thankful filmmakers.
This week, we are especially thankful to all of the talented cast and crew who help us finish our projects on time and under budget.
Speaking of budgets, we always start with a dream budget for our projects. We end up shooting for the minimum necessary budget. So let's talk a little bit about our budgets, our process this week, and maybe share some ideas on how filmmakers can save some money. So Victoria, why don't we start out with the least labor and resource intensive shoot you've ever been on and produced?
I think that would actually be Dive. And it only came about because the script I was trying to write was several locations, about 35 actors, multiple days. So it needed to happen. But the only reason I know that is because I keep track of all of my budgets in a very detailed spreadsheet.
Oh,
which
nice.
sounds nerdy and horrible, but is actually very helpful for me. So if anybody else wants the spreadsheet, we're just giving away the same template that I use for all of my films. So if you subscribe to our newsletter using the link in the description or go to indiefilmpodcast.com, you can just have that same budget template for free. Anyway.
Hopefully it's handy for you.
Hopefully. But in the meantime, Chuck, what was your least resource-intensive project?
Actually, we challenged ourselves, a group of filmmakers and myself, my brother, Danny Clamers, who's been on the podcast. The three of us wanted to shoot a short film with zero cast.
Ooh.
And so we were actually able to make a micro short. It's on YouTube. It's called 3 Day Bender, number 3, 3 Day Bender. It's a chit chat web series on Lower Gentry Studios YouTube channel. And it ended up being 2.5 minutes long. We shot it in one location. It's kind of like a stop motion animation story about a woman who is on a 3-day alcohol binge. And the way we did it was I wrote a song and we used kind of like the stop motion animation within the environment of this apartment and trashed the place slowly. And then the music crescendoed based on the sound effects that I recorded of various like bottles opening, wine glasses being poured.
Oh, nice.
And so it actually turned out pretty well. And I guess the goal was to shoot something with zero cast. We were able to do it. Fortunately, it turned out fairly decently, but it was kind of a lesson in how few people can we have on a set.
Yeah.
And the whole series is like 12 challenges that my brother Danny and I put before ourselves. It's a 12 films over 12 months is what we did with the Chit Chat web series. And that was probably the most extreme example of a challenge that we set forth on.
That's a difficult one, especially when you didn't want it to be animated, but you knew you didn't want to cast.
Yes.
And unless the birds and wildlife in your area are real exciting, which you never know, squirrels get into some drama, but that's really cool. That's awesome. That's a unique way to try to cut down on at least cast, but definitely crew for sure too. You didn't need hair and makeup. You didn't need wardrobe. Nope. I feel like art department needed to step up a little bit.
Well, we were all in charge of art department.
That helps.
Yeah. And as I was moving like the plates and the bottles and the beer cans around, I was getting the sound effect and then setting them where they needed to go.
Nice.
So, you can check that out online. And that was kind of, it was important that we did that because the next large project that we did was the feature film, Stockton to Table Rock, and us being able to know how we work together in a challenging environment allowed us to more easily complete the feature film basically under time.
Yeah.
The budget was minimal on that. Almost none when you compare it to the large Hollywood budgets. And people were volunteering, but we didn't want to waste their time on that just because they were volunteering, and that's something that I think a lot of people out there should consider, even if you are paying people, just because you can have them on set. Like, efficiency is important. And the way that you learn that is by working with crew over and over again.
Yeah, I will say that's really important. If it's crew that you've worked with before, how everybody works, how everybody gets along, who picks up the slack in certain areas, who needs somebody to pick up the slack for them in certain areas.
Yeah.
When you learn all those ins and outs of working with a certain group of people, then it becomes a lot faster to work with them over and over and over again because you know exactly how to communicate. You get your own lingo that isn't just some of the weird lingo that you see online of I don't know if anybody else gets these weird videos in their algorithm, but the fun people talking about like, oh yeah, just give me a double on the dolly, blah, 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 like whatever. And then it's all this weird slang that nobody knows.
Well, not in the indie film scene as much here in Boise because we don't get a lot of large commercial productions rolling through.
No, but every team comes up with their own little lingo that they use. You know what certain things mean. If somebody says, hey, can you soften this a little bit, then that probably doesn't mean the focus. It means the light. And okay, maybe that's an obvious example.
Yeah.
But to that effect, you're going to get your own, what is that, your lexicon with your crew going.
And workflow.
Yeah.
So should we first start talking about, because obviously it's good to work with similar cast and crew as much as possible, even though that does kind of silo groups of filmmakers off from one another, even if they're a part of the same community.
Yeah.
However, that does make things more efficient and make things easier to actually produce when you have fewer wild cards, because the wild cards on set, it's a couple occasions they've caused problems, at least for on some of the productions that I've been on. And if you're working with new people, it might end up being a lot slower just because you don't know who they are, what the expectations are, which can be prevented in pre-production.
Yes. And I would say you can offset a lot of that just by being a very effective communicator, by making sure you know exactly what you want. And then that way, whether it's a DP you've worked with, if you're the director, I guess is what I'm assuming, if it's a DP you've worked with in the past and they kind of understand what you're saying, but maybe this is a new DP you've never worked with before, being able to clearly state what you want, which means having the technical prowess to understand what you want.
Yeah.
Which means more research on your side, sorry. But I feel like that can offset a lot of it. I don't know. It's sad that so many people get so siloed, especially in small filmmaking communities.
Yeah.
It makes sense because it's so easy to work with people that you know, that you trust, who get you and get your vision and your work. But I do think there is something to be said for bringing new people onto your sets too, and working with new people and experiencing different perspectives and input and getting a little bit of that diversity, I guess.
Nice. Yeah, no, I agree with that. Tip that I want to give before we start talking about changing your script to fit your actual budget that you have for making a film.
Yeah.
I think the tip before that, which you touched on, is that if you are a writer and director and you're anticipating that your idea is going to be turned into a short film and you've never held a camera before and you know nothing about film audio, the first thing that I would recommend you do is purchase a camera or borrow a camera, spend time with it, learn how the shutter speed / shutter angle works, learn the basics of exposure, mess around with lighting.
Understand what different lenses do.
Yes, because uneducated or uninformed directors are going to slow down a production more than anything else, in my opinion.
Probably.
Because you need to be able to communicate in an effective way with your cinematographer and with the audio person. It's one of those things.
And your cast.
Yes, and yeah.
You got to make sure they know what you want to do.
If you've never directed actors, that's a big red flag too. So
it's not a red flag. Everyone has to start somewhere. I don't think it's a red flag, but it is concerning if you've never at least dabbled or AD'd before either.
Yes.
And you just woke up one day and said, today's the day. I'm a director.
Yes.
I can feel it.
I guess there's not very many people that are that way, but I've run into a couple and it's kind of fun to see them struggle. So
the other point you were making, though, I guess, was changing your script to fit your budget.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. So when we shot the short film that I mentioned before with zero cast, we had to work on the idea first.
Yeah.
Because we wanted to film at one location, just the 3 crew, see what we could do. So the first thing that we started with, I believe it was I wrote a rhythm, like a song, and then used the samples that I got on set to replace that. So we kind of knew where the crescendo was going to go as far as visuals and piling up, like bottles and basically having this place look pristine, using stop motion animation to destroy it, and then ending with vomiting sounds from behind the door from the quote-unquote lead actor who never even appears on screen.
Which is kind of cool. So
you can do it. There's probably a million different ways to do that same idea or something similar to that. But if you have an idea like you had for the short film that you were going to shoot that was 10 minutes, and it took place in 4 locations. It was going to have 35 extras.
Yeah.
And this was for a film festival / competition where you weren't allowed to pay people.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, fortunately for you, that would have been really expensive anyway, but also just being able to find that number of locations that would be willing to donate their space,
Yeah.
as well as finding all those people.
Yeah.
The first thing you did was just threw the idea out the window or saved it for later.
Yeah, I was like, I still have it because it is it's something I like, and I do want to play with that one day. But yeah, that's not a quick, I don't need to pay people to do this kind of project. That's a budgeted project.
Yeah, absolutely. And instead you ended up shooting a short film where it was 2 lead actors, a bartender, so basically 3 cast, and then minimal crew on the back end, all in one location over 2 half days.
Yep. That was better.
Super, super simple to do. And if anyone out there is looking to get into filmmaking, maybe you've been doing commercial work and you're used to working with a plethora of crew members.
If you're on sets that have at least 3 PAs, that's not an indie set. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
I feel like the number of PAs can tell you what tier you're at.
That's actually how we should rate the scale of indie filmmaking is how many PAs do you have?
How many PAs and how many ADs?
Yeah.
Because if people have their own individual AD, then...
Yes.
Yeah.
Because we've been on sets where there's 0 PAs and 0 ADs.
Yes.
So it's obviously, it makes the workflow a lot different, but it's manageable as long as you can create an idea and a script that maybe does take place in one location that you have access to. Maybe only has 1 or 2 cast members.
Yeah.
And if you want to get started and you don't have a whole lot of experience, you can probably find actors that are willing to help you out if they're looking for demo reel material, if they're just starting out.
Yeah.
And they make very inexpensive wireless lav mics. I know like a couple of companies do. It's not my ideal situation, but you can take 2 lavs, lav the people up, learn how to hide them, plug it directly into your camera, hit record, and you got yourself like a 3-person, 2 cast and 1 crew to shoot something potentially.
Yeah.
And as long as you write an interesting script within the limitations that you have, you can produce that for a very low budget, even if you do decide to pay the cast members, or you can only find cast members that are willing to work for money.
And to be fair, yeah, ideally everybody gets paid for working on projects.
Yeah,
right?
we're not saying
in
that
an ideal world,
you shouldn't pay people. All I'm saying is that I got my experience coming up working with volunteers.
Yeah.
And I don't think that there's anything necessarily bad with that if you're doing something that's artistic.
Yeah.
Versus I'm going to make a commercial that I'm going to sell to company XYZ.
Well, actually, that would be my biggest point for budgets as far as kind of finding that compromise middle ground of, your dream budget versus what you're actually going to get. And I know I preach this a lot, so it's probably a little underwhelming to our regular listeners. But if you know what the goal is for your film, then you can get an idea of how much you're going to see come back to it.
Yes.
So if you, I guess, what was it, profit versus practice?
Profit versus practice,
So why are you making this film? Are you making this film because you just want to make your art, which is valid and totally fine. That can be a reason. But are you making it because of that? Are you making it because you want to repay your investors who put in their money? Or are you making it because you do want to make money on top of just everything you got put into it? And once you kind of have that figured out, then you can take a look at where is this going to sell? How much money can I realistically get back for it? There are ways that you can sort of start analyzing your own numbers, your own realistic returns on things. And then once you have those numbers, it's a lot easier to come up with your budget.
Yeah.
Right? If you think realistically, I'm going to make about $50K back on this film just from the streaming outlets that I know will likely take it.
Yeah.
Then you probably don't want a $50,000 budget if your investors expect to be repaid.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So those are just things to keep in mind. Start with the money you expect to make back from it.
Yeah.
And then build your budget from there. And keep in mind, a lot of investors right now, depending on the genre, obviously, but a lot of investors don't want to see a budget of over $100K for an indie film. just because the odds of the return being very substantial at that point are low.
Yeah.
There are always outliers. There are always exceptions to the rule. And that could be your film. I don't know. I don't know your film. But try to keep your dream goal at that 100K and instead rework the numbers, adjust your script if necessary to be maybe fewer locations or fewer shoot days, because those are two of the big above the line costs that are going to really cut down your budget.
Yeah.
And then go from there.
And be flexible. So maybe we should talk a little bit about the dream budget versus the minimum budget.
Yeah.
And how many times have you written out a dream budget and then realized that it's actually going to be your minimum budget, or even less than that because you're going to be paying out of pocket for part of that?
Yep, that's a lot of them.
Yes,
not all, but most.
Yeah,
for sure, most.
Absolutely. But I feel like it's good to have that dream budget just in case you do have some sort of windfall that comes through.
Because anything can happen. You might have a wealthy relative you don't know about, and they could just kick the bucket.
True.
And leave all their money to you.
Yeah, and if you do find out about them, see what their food allergies are. No, I'm just kidding. Don't kill your childless uncle because you want the cash now.
Yeah, don't do that.
Or if you do, let's make a movie about it because that would sell and be super meta.
I do feel like
Charlie Kaufman will read the novel about it, the nonfiction novel, and then make a movie.
I will say there are a lot of indie films right now that it seems to be trending that they're discussing like indie filmmakers and sort of down on their luck people in the entertainment industry and what all weird things they're willing to do to just get by and survive. And I think that is telling about the industry at the moment.
Absolutely. Yes, you could potentially get a bunch of money, and that would be awesome to pay that back to all the cast and crew that have helped you out in the past, or just pay them what they're worth on the day of the set.
Yeah.
But usually when I've been a part of the budgetary process on a film, it's kind of like there's the dream budget where everybody has their commercial day rate.
Yeah.
And then the minimum budget, which we were able to get volunteers for Lower Gentry Studios film Stocknet at Table Rock, which was super nice. But on the next feature, I know that Bradley and Zoe, the two lead producers on Lower Gentry's next film, are working on paying everybody somewhat. But the thing is there's a negotiated minimum that we as the crew and a lot of the cast are willing to work for that is for an artistic project versus another, whatever, commercial for some company that's rolling through town.
Yeah.
Some large television production that happens to be doing a reality shoot in the Treasure Valley. People are going to want more money for that.
Yep.
Than they're going to want for, in most cases, then they're going to charge for somebody that's going to be producing a piece of art where you're going to be proud to have your name in the credits.
Yeah.
And also have a little bit of control. We were talking about that as well, as far as saving money with your crew. Where I'm going to be more inclined to do location sound if I get to do back-end sound mixing and sound design and kind of put my own spin on the film.
You get to actually feel like you had a creative say in this piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and I do know that there are also a lot of DPs, like myself included, who, if you also ask them to do the edit, then they'll give you a discounted rate on that edit because they shot it. They already know what footage they're working with, and it's going to be a lot less work than just handing them some random footage that somebody they maybe don't trust shot. So that's another option too, is where can you sort of double up and what in your network can you really leverage to get the most out of something to stretch your dollar a little bit farther. Not saying don't pay people and not saying don't pay people what they're worth, but find out what those limits and expectations are from people, because just because you know their commercial day rate doesn't mean you know their creative day rate.
Yeah, and it's good to clarify all that information and hopefully if you have contacts that are willing to invest in your film, presenting the high budget there, and then for the cast and crew, presenting them the low budget. Because then if you end up with something in between that, everybody's happy.
Yeah, it doesn't end up with everybody being sad.
Yeah. Actually, I learned that embarrassingly enough. I sold cars for a year right out of college. And there was this one car salesman that sold so many cars so quickly. And I pulled him aside. I'm like, what is it that you're doing? And he said, don't tell the boss this. But if somebody comes in and they say, I want to buy this car for $20,000 and the price tag is, say, 25, and you sell it to them for, the 20,000 that they want, they're going to leave happy, right? Yeah. And I said, well, yeah, obviously. He said, well, then when you tell the boss how much they want to buy the car for, you tell the boss, 17,000.
Yeah, so you tell them 15 to 17, somewhere in there.
And then when the boss comes up with the number 20 and the customer sees the number 20, then they're happy. I'm like, oh, okay. So this is what it is to be middle management, which ended up being a valuable lesson through
it is a valuable
lot
lesson.
Of the rest of my life, yes. But, delivering above and beyond expectations on all ends, there's a way to maneuver that.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
There's disclosing and withholding information in the right moment.
Yeah.
That just, gives you a little bit of a leg up. That's
yes,
good.
absolutely.
That's good.
As long as it's for everybody's benefit.
Yes.
Yeah. Then you can withhold information. No, that sounds horrible.
That sounds terrifying.
Yeah, it does. Yes, it does. But that's the lesson I learned. And when you're dealing with people, it's better to set the least possible expectation, see if they're on board with that, and then do your best to present something better, make it better than what you promised. So,
well, on that note, I do something similar with that. So the spreadsheet that I mentioned, I keep track of exactly what the top most budget is based on how much I think the movie's going to make back.
Okay.
Or based on existing limitations that have already been told by whoever has hired me to produce their film. And then I take 10% right off the top because that's your contingency. And yes, I know 10% sounds excessive. I don't care. Unexpected costs always happen and they always add up. And what's the worst thing that happens? You're under budget if you don't spend it. Like that's a good thing. That's fine. Then you have more money for marketing anyway, which I always support. Anyway, so then I go through and sort of line everything up based on total number of shooting days that we're expecting, based on the length of the script, the number of locations, et cetera, et cetera. I go through and break all these things down. And yes, the formulas are already built into the spreadsheet. So don't worry, you don't have to do that because I'm really bad at math and I don't want to do that myself. So
everybody should just use the spreadsheet.
Just use the spreadsheet.
No matter how good at math you are, you're going to make more errors than Excel or Google Sheets.
Yes. Yeah, it's a Google Sheet, which you can import into Excel, but it is a Google Sheet. So then once I have all of that set, then I go through in different tabs. I create other alternates where, okay, but we don't get the cast we want or we don't get the location that we want, and that's going to change some numbers. So that way you can kind of move things around.
Oh, nice.
And that way I have different ways that this all plays out and can present them to, the executive director or executive producer or director, and then chat through what their dream scenario is versus what our minimum viable product scenario is. And then I always keep a column of the actual cost.
Oh, nice.
So whatever budget we decide on, I then go through and keep track of exactly how much everything is costing, exactly how much every person's signing on for, what craft services ended up costing, which over the last 2 years, I've noticed that as food prices increase, I have to keep upping that estimated average for everybody. It's no longer $20 per person per day. I'm now putting it closer to 25 or 30, depending on what type of catering there is.
Yes.
And I remember a time when I used to be able to put $15 a day per person for food. And that's not the world we live in anymore.
No.
So keep in mind that some of those costs go up, and now equipment costs are going up, which means that insurance costs are also going to be going up a little bit. But because I have those constant running logs and I can look back on any project from any year and know exactly what I did end up spending, I can not only get a better idea of my own personal downfalls and habits on where I tend to over or under budget, but I can also start to see trends in where some of these costs are going and help me forecast for future projects even better.
Nice.
So I recommend keeping that extra actual cost column. It's very much so worth it.
I dig that. That's very solid advice. You're much more organized in your spreadsheets than I am.
I am a big fan of spreadsheets. And also I will say that when it comes to tax time and you want to go back and look at all those costs and it doesn't line up with your receipts, now you know you're missing some receipts because you spent more money than that, and you got to go find that receipt now.
Oh, yeah.
So that can help you too.
You want to deduct that.
Yes,
Very cool.
you do.
One other thing I wanted to mention too, as far as like the dream budget versus the minimum budget, is maybe consider on the creative end being flexible as well.
Yeah.
Shot listing.
Oh.
And maybe if you don't get enough money, then you're going to have to cut certain scenes that might maybe have them in the script, and they exist if you're able to get access to the equipment and crew and locations to be able to do that. But maybe if it's not 100% necessary, have a backup plan at the script level and the shot level to where you can cut that expensive. I mean, obviously that hurts.
It hurts
to do that.
It's not even killing your darlings.
No,
it's
I mean,
too early.
yeah.
That's like taking Plan B. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
It's a rough one.
It is. So, but just keeping that in mind as an option before you go into shooting, I think or when you're in the fundraising phase, I think that would probably be important as well.
It is.
I do know that, like for Stockton at Table Rock, we changed the entire script, or my brother rewrote the entire script based on the fact that we were not able to find enough children actors. And so that changed substantially. And,
Yeah.
it was 100% necessary to do that. But if you want to make films, it's compromise.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, and you're going to have to compromise on your dream budget. You're going to have to compromise on your creative dreams, because when you have that many people involved, and you're going to run into those unknown unknowns, and things are going to have to change on the fly. I think flexibility is probably the most important.
Flexibility is going to save your budget more than anything else, for sure. Because, you're right. You can spend 1 to 2 days trying to get this exact long, perfect tracking shot that you need perfectly choreographed, perfectly lit, et cetera, that you'll spend days doing.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, or you cut 3 days off your production by changing up the shots.
By mixing it up. But to have that there, I guess, in my brain, I think of it as an added bonus if it's able to be done, rather than this is the crux of my story. And if I don't have this, it doesn't make any sense. It's like, well, maybe if you're working with a low budget, if you're working with a skeleton crew, maybe you need to consider the idea that you want to have filmed.
Yeah. I think that's solid.
Because we're not most of us aren't multi-million-dollar movie makers. And if you are a multi-million-dollar movie maker and you're watching this podcast, please send us an email, because we'd love to help you.
We would love to hear from you. And subscribe to the newsletter while you're at it, you know.
Send us a few bucks.
Yeah. Hire us on your next project.
Yeah,
even.
that'd be good.
Whatever.
Is there anything else that you'd like to reflect on as far as budgets are concerned?
I think it's just don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And when you're outlining your budget and you know there are some things that are just going to cost way too much, it's okay to let go of those. To your point on flexibility, but also to your point of you want to get the film made, and just because you don't raise your dream or your goal budget doesn't mean you shouldn't make your movie. You should always make your movie. It's just how exactly that movie is going to look that'll change depending on your budget.
Yeah, and everything to me is practice.
Yeah.
The more you do it, the better you get at it. And if you can't get the funds that you wanted to have in order to make your dream film, then go out there, take a camera, shoot a short film, get creative. You can do it, even if it's just you. There are ways to get it done.
We might try that as a challenge here soon, just to see how exciting we can make that for our viewers.
I think that's a good one. And we've had a couple listeners out there, which thank you so much for sharing. That we have had a couple listeners share their solo made films, and it is possible to do it.
It's possible.
And the quality was good on these movies where it was just one person, cast, crew,
writer, editor, all of it.
The whole thing. So it is possible.
Which would definitely cut down on your crafty budget.
Yes. That's probably the best way to save money on a film set, is just do it all yourself.
Just do everything.
Although, to me, I like the interaction. Because if sitting in post-production is always, that's the most draining aspect of a film. It's fun, it's creative, but it's like you get, nobody to interact with, nobody to make jokes to besides yourself. So that's not a story we heard on those solo filmmakers. About the jokes on set and how they got through that.
They laughed at their own jokes to make it through the day.
Good. the social aspect. All right. Anything else to add, or shall we succinctly say farewell at this juncture?
I think a succinct farewell sounds wonderful.
Excellent. Goodbye.
Bye.